Good afternoon. Welcome to Harris Hall, and welcome to the afternoon session, of the Tuesday, February 7th Board of Commissioners regular meeting. Ms. Mokrahayski, we have a couple of things on our agenda this afternoon. The first thing on item 10A, and if you're following online, if you click on View Material, you'll see all of the material the board has considered for this particular item and for each item on today's agenda. The first item is a first reading and setting the second reading and public hearing on Ordinance 2301 in the matter of amending Lane County Code, Chapter 10.600-25 to update the flood hazard regulations within the City of Eugene Development Codes 9.6705 to 9.6709 to align more closely with state law and the core of federal regulations, with some citations. And good afternoon. Mr. Mokrahayski, I typically turn it over to you to introduce your staff, but we all know you well, so.
Well, thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Jared Bowder. I'm the Lane County Staff Planner for this project. This is a first reading for ordinance number 2301, also identified as Land Management Division file number 509, PA 22-05559, City of Eugene file number CA 22-22. This code amendment project was initiated by the City of Eugene to make amendments to the flood hazard regulations of the Eugene Development Code, which applies within the urban growth boundary of the city. This project was initiated as a direct result of the city's most recent National Flood Insurance Program Community Assistance Visit conducted by the Oregon Department of Land Conservation and Development, DLCD, in partnership with the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA. And Lane County underwent a similar amendment to our floodplain ordinances in 2020 after our NFIP community assistance visit made the requirement known. This was done by adopted ordinance number 20-08. And the item before you today is also a request that the board set a second reading and public hearing for March 7th, 2023, time certain at 1:30 p.m. At that time, staff will provide a more comprehensive staff report on the project, and there will be an opportunity for public comment as well. And with that, I'll include my staff presentation for this first reading. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bowder. I'll open it up for questions or for a motion. Vice Chair Trieger.
Chair, I'll move to approve the first reading of Ordinance 23-01 and to set the second reading and public hearing for March 7, 2023 at 1:30 p.m. date and time certain.
I'll second.
Moved by Vice Chair Trieger and seconded by Commissioner Buck, the first reading and setting the second reading and public hearing on Ordinance 2301. Discussion to the motion? I'm seeing none. I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Passes unanimously. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
See you in 2 weeks. 3 weeks. Next, Ms. Mokrahayski, we have a work session on first reading and setting of the second reading and public hearing on ordinance number PA 1388. And this is in the matter of adopting an ordinance establishing urban reserves for the City of Eugene, amending the Eugene-Springfield Metropolitan Area General Plan, amending the Lane County Rural Comprehensive Plan, amending the Envision Eugene Comprehensive Plan, and amending the Public Facilities and Services Plan with some citations. And Ms. Mokrahayski, I'll turn it over to you to introduce your staff. It's not only your staff, we have some city council members, city members with us today also.
Yeah, so I'll turn it over to Lindsay Eigner, our principal planner in land management, to introduce the panel.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair and Commissioners. Today we have multiple City of Eugene staff with us. At the table today we have Emily Jerome, who is counsel for the city, and Rebecca Gershow, who's the project manager. So to start off the presentation, the first time we were before the board on this project was in June of 2018. So we've been working a very long time, closely city and county staff together on this project. The packet that was posted online and provided with you is very, very long. It's so I wanted to do just kind of a brief overview of what's in the packet. The first thing is a brief agenda cover memo prepared by county staff, and then attached to that is a joint, what we call agenda item summary, AIS, agenda item summary, that was prepared by Rebecca and myself. And then there's links to materials if you want to access the documents individually or we provided the full ordinance and all of the attachments as well in the packet. So if you're trying to navigate to a specific document, the links in the AIS exhibit might prove more handy when you're navigating through the materials.
And I'll remind the board, any one of you can ask for reading the ordinance in full at any time.
Yeah, we have it in paper today. And then we've also included the most recent Planning Commission packet, which has a response to public comments, and it goes through a explanation of some amendments that were made between when we were at our Planning Commission getting a formal recommendation and through today. And we'll go over those in detail as well through the presentation. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Rebecca. We're both presenting throughout the presentation, and then we are happy to reserve plenty of time for questions at the end.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, Chair Farr, Commissioners. Thank you for having us here today. The last time we were here was in November of 2020, and so we're going to spend a little bit of time giving some background on urban reserves, why we're doing this work, the work that we've done, and then what's included in the adoption package for your consideration. And I just wanted to reiterate what Lindsay said, is that this is our first work session with you, no action today, plenty of time for questions, and we'll be coming back for a public hearing and then for deliberation. So there will be plenty of time to get any questions that you have answered. And is there something that I need to do here for getting this presentation started?
You just did it.
I just did. Excellent. Thank you.
Lindsay, I can run it if you'd like. Oh, but you got it.
Looks great. There we go. Okay, great. Thank you. So, Urban Reserves is a partnership, as you heard, between Eugene and Lane County to plan for the next 2 generations until 2059. We're identifying the best areas for Eugene to grow into beyond the urban growth boundary when additional land is needed for our growing population. It's important for us to keep reiterating that land in urban reserves will remain rural unless it's brought into Eugene's UGB through a formal process. So why we're doing this work now? It's important now for a number of reasons. We're continuing to grow. The Eugene population estimate for 2059 is almost 260,000 folks. And as we all know, housing supply and affordability are critically important issues, now more than ever, and urban reserves is just one piece of that puzzle. In 2015, the City Council, supported by the County Board of Commissioners, directed us to do this work and set aside funds to prepare an urban reserve proposal for your consideration. This is aligned with other projects that we're focused on inside the UGB, such as the work of the city's growth monitoring program and the new middle housing code changes. So I want to take a moment to recognize that this has been a truly collaborative effort. City and county staff have worked with a variety of stakeholders, including rural Lane County property owners, residents, utility and service providers, nearby cities, and many others. Our Technical Advisory Committee, the ETAC, reviewed the project's technical analysis at 18 different meetings. Collectively, staff has met with the Lane County and Eugene Planning Commissions, City Council, and Board of Commissioners almost 30 times since the project began. So since there are a number of new board members since the last time we were here, we'd like to quickly review how urban reserves planning is different from and works with the UGB expansion process. Without urban reserves in place, future UGB expansions would likely be limited by state law to selecting land from what the state identifies as first priority exception areas, which are these rust-colored areas on the map here that mainly include rural residential and rural industrial lands. The problem is many of these areas are already developed to some degree and are scattered and disconnected from one another and from the UGB. So when you consider them by themselves, they have limited redevelopment opportunities and are extremely expensive to serve. Urban reserves gives us additional options for better growth and for meeting our goals if and when there is a need to expand the UGB. This map shows how urban reserves expands the option for where the city can grow in the future if and when needed. The UGB would be expanded incrementally over time only when necessary into this urban reserve land. Urban reserves also provides clarity to property owners about the long-term future use of their land. If it's in urban reserves, they know that it will likely come into the UGB by 2059. So this is a matrix that we developed for property owners. There's too many words here for this use, but you can see this second column. This is on our project page, and we've distributed this to project property owners. So we have different categories where folks may live outside of urban reserves. The second column is within urban reserves, within the UGB, and within the city limits. So it shows folks what types of things change when land is included in urban reserves. And the summary is that these urban reserve lands remain rural. They retain county representation and services. They don't have a change in taxation, and they aren't eligible to annex to the city or be provided city services. That would all come later. What urban reserves does is prioritize the land to be included in the UGB, so property may be developed to urban levels in the future when it's needed. So here is our process diagram. It illustrates the phases of work that we undertook to get us to this formal adoption process on the right side, where we are today. After the project was initiated, the technical analysis was a multi-step process, and it was focused on identifying the amount of land that was needed for urban reserves by determining how many homes or jobs could be accommodated on that land that was developable. So these maps are examples of some of the work that was undertaken in the technical analysis. They're both included in the urban reserve study that's part of the adoption package in your materials. On the left, map 1 identifies the study area, and map 5 on the right shows the land in the study area with development potential. It illustrates the land classification system that was used in our technical analysis. This was a very complex phase. It's super simplified here, and it was the foundation for the rest of the urban reserves work that was undertaken. Much more detail on this can be found in our technical analysis memo that's also in your adoption package. So the suitability analysis was the next phase of our work. And while the technical analysis was our quantitative work, the suitability analysis was the qualitative phase. That said, it was still very directed by state guidance. So policies provide us this guidance on where to grow, but there is no perfect area for Eugene to grow into. All areas have trade-offs. And so the purpose of the suitability analysis was to consider and balance a list of factors prescribed by these state rules, then dismiss land that would be unsuitable for urban reserves. So here are a couple of maps from our suitability analysis. They can also be found in the study in your packet. Map 6 on the left shows the 18 different sub-areas that we broke the study area down into for ease of analysis. And you have 18 different reports attached to the study. And map 7 on the right shows of the approximately 27,000 acres of land that was studied, approximately 11,000 acres are potentially suitable for urban reserves based on the criteria. And that includes both developable and undevelopable land. So the suitability analysis went through multiple rounds of review by city and county staff, service providers, our technical advisory committee, and then we had meetings with the public. Back when we were still having big public meetings in January of 2020, we shared this information with mostly rural Lane County property owners and residents. There was a lot of interest and questions from over 125 different folks. So that set us up for the option development phase, where we developed several different urban reserves options for consideration. They were refined with the help of our technical advisory committee and with surveys to the public. We ended up proposing a range of different urban reserve sizes for folks to choose from the largest possible urban reserves, which was 30 years, to the smallest possible, which was 10 years. So there was a significant amount of public engagement during this phase, and in the end, we received direction on the proposed urban reserves that we're sharing with you today. So the order and methodology we used to select land for urban reserves was based on state guidance, and there's a lot of information here, but the takeaway is that the lands that were designated for farming and for forest uses were selected last for urban reserves. And among those, properties with the highest quality soils were also selected last in order to protect the study area's highest quality growing lands. So on November 10th in 2020, after receiving Planning Commission recommendations, the Lane County Board of Commissioners unanimously passed a motion in agreement with the Eugene City Council to initiate the adoption process for the 27-year urban reserve option. So this is a map of the 27-year option, which is the proposed urban reserves that is included in your adoption package. This direction was in support of an urban reserves that does not include the study area's highest value farmland or adjacent properties with higher value soils. Both council and the board expressed an interest in preserving those highest value agricultural lands from future urbanization. So this proposed urban reserves that you see here includes just over 5,900 developable acres, which are expected to provide a 27-year supply of developable land, covering a planning period of 2032 to 2059. Before I move on, I don't want to underestimate the impacts of public engagement throughout the planning process. We have a public engagement summary. I'm sorry, I didn't realize we still had that moving graphic. That's a little distracting. We utilized a variety of outreach methods during the planning process, as you can see here, including 5 different in-person meetings with mostly rural Lane County folks. And after the pandemic hit, when we stopped having in-person meetings, we had a month-long virtual open house that involved approximately 1,500 participants. So finally, we're at the adoption process. And actually, I need to update my check marks because they should go down through the Planning Commission recommendations. Prior to this fall, when we began our work with the Planning Commissions, staff were working on refining and documenting our analysis, report writing, and assembling the adoption package for your review. This past fall, the Planning Commissions met, or we met with both planning commissions with work sessions, similar how we're doing the board and the city council. We mailed out almost 4,000 notices, which were primarily to rural Lane County property owners and residents in and immediately adjacent to the urban reserve study area. And we held a public hearing on October 18th. And we're now at the first meeting of the adoption process with the board, and we're very happy to be here. So here is the recommendation that was received by the Lane County Planning Commission. In fact, both Eugene and Lane County Planning Commissions unanimously voted to recommend to their elected officials the approval of the Urban Reserves adoption package with the set of changes that responded to the public testimony that we received during their process. So more specifically, the Lane County Planning Commission passed a motion 9-0 to recommend that the Board of Commissioners approve the Urban Reserves package with the following changes. To revise and remove almost 18 acres of developable land that's owned by the Wildish Company for sand and gravel operations from the proposed urban reserves. To revise and correct text and maps related to the description of Lane County's Goal 5 wetlands. And to revise text to incorporate more information about big game habitat. We've done that. And the updated urban reserves proposal that's provided to you includes these changes that were recommended by both planning commissions. In your packet, one of the many, many documents that you have is a staff memo that's dated November 29th, 2022, that goes into a lot of detail on some of this key testimony that we received and the response, and we're also happy to talk about this more. So, the adoption package that you have in front of you and that you also have in your board office in paper form that looks very similar to this binder here. And I apologize, this is draft City of Eugene ordinance. It's because the City of Eugene ordinance and the Lane County ordinance are virtually the same, and I apologize for not updating that. But it does include all of the pieces that that is included in the county ordinance. So all these components here are linked for your reference in attachment B. The draft Lane County ordinance includes amendments in these 4 different plans that you see here. And we're going to go into some of those in a couple of minutes. Lindsay's going to go through that. Also included in the ordinance are intergovernmental agreements that are regarding coordinated planning between City of Eugene and Lane County and with 10 different statutory special districts whose boundaries are included in urban reserves. Mostly those are fire districts, but also included is the Junction City Water Control District, LTD, and Willamine. These IGAs are administrative, meaning they've already been negotiated with each of the service districts, and they're ready to be signed by the county administrator when the urban reserves package is adopted. Also included in the adoption package are the project's legal findings that were developed in support of the Eugene Urban Reserves. And included in those findings are the following documents: a summary of our public engagement, the Eugene Urban Reserve study that I've been referencing. Included in that study are the 18 suitability analysis reports and a serviceability analysis summary. There's also a technical memo that describes the assumptions and methodology behind the technical analysis involved in urban reserves. And that includes a couple of different pieces. Our land need model documentation, so you can see the calculations that go into how we developed our land need, and mapping documentation of our undevelopable land. Finally, we include a list and a map with all of the tax lots included in urban reserves. So this is Lindsay's part. She's going to walk you through some of the, not all of the amendments that are proposed, but the policy pieces that, that we feel are most relevant.
So in your packet, as Rebecca was saying, includes every single amendment where we have to tweak, add a couple words here and there peppered throughout the different plans. But I'm going to go over the actual policies we're proposing to add in to the Metro Plan and the Rural Comprehensive Plan that are guided by the Urban Reserves OAR provisions. So up on the screen, you'll see on the right-hand side is the proposed policy language, and then on the left-hand side is the state requirement. I'm not asking you to read those necessarily, but it's just a visual so that you can see where the provisions are coming from. And I also wanted to note that we are not proposing any amendments to our zoning code or our land division requirements. Those are some options that are laid out as optional in the OAR provisions, but we decided that we want to implement as little amount of restrictions on these properties so that they can continue to be utilized as they're utilized today. The options are still out there today. So I'll cover them briefly. I'm not going to read them out loud. They are written out in the packet, and I'm happy to answer any questions after we go through them. So this first one kind of just covers that we're adopting a map, and that the areas that are within that designated urban reserved area shall be given priority consideration at the next time that the city goes through the process to expand their urban growth boundary. And then this is the map that is proposed to be adopted into the Rural Comprehensive Plan and the Metro Plan. In the green, you can see is the boundary of the Metro Plan, but this basically the same map will be adopted. We're also including an electronic version of the map will be adopted so that it will be very specific and we can utilize it in our GIS software and be able to reference it that this is what was adopted by the jurisdictions. So we can go to the next one. So this proposed policy language is taken pretty much straight from the state requirements. And it basically says that if a property is currently allowed to build one dwelling on it, they'll continue to be allowed to build a dwelling on it. This is a requirement to be adopted by the state, and we're happy to include this policy in our plan as well. The next policy is a subset. Right on to the next one. Let's see. So this policy includes language that ensures that land designated as urban reserves doesn't change too much. It's not overly developed before considering the land for urban growth boundary expansion. So this policy required by the state says that the county must continue rural zoning on this property. So again, it's the uses that are allowed today will continue to be allowed, but in the zoning code, anything that's allowed, somebody could come in and apply for that use, but we can't apply more urban uses onto those properties. So this policy is a subset of the previous policy, and is again pretty much straight from the state requirement that focuses on exception and non-resource lands. So that's rural residential, industrial, commercial zonings. And in essence, it's just stating that they will remain the same. We can't increase the intensity of the uses by adopting new codes. If somebody was trying to, an example might be that if you have a rural residential zone with a 10-acre minimum lot size, somebody wanted to come in and apply to increase the density to be a 5-acre minimum lot size, this policy provided by the state would not allow that. But they could continue with the, what they have today. And the essence is that the idea of urban reserves is that they'll remain in the same uses until the time that the urban growth boundary expands. So I know I'm repetitive there, but a lot of these policies just really, that's the point, that they're trying to keep the land very much the same so that at the time the urban growth boundary expands, development can be more compact and efficient when that development happens. So this policy is a second subset to the last policy, and it focuses on resource land, which is land designated farm or forest land. There's some, or marginal land is also considered a resource land. The overarching intention of this policy is that land must remain the same, again, what I've been saying, and it states that the county will not rezone or redesignate resource land to non-resource uses. So that would mean taking ag or forest land and reclassifying it as residential, commercial, or industrial. They could still go between resource uses. You could go from ag to forest or to marginal lands. They just we couldn't apply and approve an application to non-resource land. We did add in a specific exception to that. In case land is awarded federal funding for development of rail-related infrastructure near existing railways. And the backstory to that, I think some of you are aware, but I don't want to assume everyone is aware, that there was a request at the federal level for upwards near $1 billion in infrastructure and investment and Job Act towards creating a major new container port in Coos Bay, and that the railway would then come to Eugene and have an offloading site just west of Eugene. That land that could eventually be that use is currently designated agricultural, and that would not be a permitted use for that. So if funding is obtained, then this exception would allow those property owners to go through the process to rezone and redesignate that land so that the use can move forward without having to wait necessarily until it goes into the urban growth boundary. There's also a chance it could go into the urban growth boundary before that happens. We don't know, but we wanted to provide the option for that project, be supportive of it. And then the last policy is just proposed to be added to the Metro Plan. And this was included in the adoption package as was directed and requested by the board in 2020 when we were last before the board. It was requested to add this, that within around 10 years after the first urban growth boundary expansion by the city, that the city, in coordination with the county staff, would review the urban reserves and determine if it was still suitable, if there was too much or too little land in the urban reserves area. We will be able to use the city's growth monitoring results, which they have growth monitoring program, and determine whether the city is growing faster or slower at that point, to determine, we'll then be coming to the decision makers at that point to recommend what we think should happen, and then let the decision makers, let you decide what should happen at that point. Do you want to do the next slide, or? Okay. So today, we did say requesting no action. I would ask that we, after we conclude the work session, we'll have a short first reading to read the title in and set the public hearing. But that's the only action we're requesting today. In the evening on February 28th, we have a joint public hearing with Eugene City Council scheduled. Then tentatively, we have deliberations set for the City of Eugene City Council on April 10th, and then before you again on April 11th. We can have more if we need, but those are the ones that we have tentatively scheduled at this point. And I think that concludes our report, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you. I have a couple of questions. You all spent a little bit of time with me on Friday answering what were some of my more detailed questions. I'm not going to bore everybody with those same questions at this point in time. I may backfill a little bit based on other questions. So I'll look for a cue initially. And while I wait for one to develop, just a quick question that I've always had, always from the very, very beginning. Can you talk ever so briefly about the confidence that we have in the population growth projections?
These are the state-directed population estimates from PSU. They're, all communities are using the same system for population estimates. Ours are from 2019, and so I would say we have the same level of confidence that any community in the state should have. And
Yeah.
these
The piece that Rebecca didn't say is that we're using them because we have to under state law. Some of you may remember what used to feel like a poker game when Lane County was asked to sort of dole out population numbers to the cities and how difficult that became. The state stepped in and said, no more of that. The cities can't lobby you to get more numbers for their cities, and we all have to use PSU. How confident are we that they're right? Kind of doesn't matter.
That is exactly the question, the answer that I wanted and expected, because it really doesn't matter. And my personal experience is that their guess is as good as mine. But we'll go forward with the discussions on this. I'll look for a cue. Any questions, Commissioner Buck?
Thank you. I just want to publicly state the question that the one that really got to me when we were talking about the potential port going in the land on Green Hill and West 11th. And thank you for making the adjustments in case that comes to fruition. But what also came of that was a discussion about having residential property right next to a railroad, which we know is not a good use of that land. And we know from the Train Song area that, you know, that's just not where we should put people. And so I asked the question, you know, can we use that land in this urban reserves? Doesn't mean that it's all necessarily residential. We can use it for commercial, industrial, or residential as the city of Eugene determines what its need is in in the expansion of any portion of the urban reserves. The answer I got back was, yes, that can be done. And so I wanted to make sure that that is still the case today. And if so, we just made that public for people to know that just because it's in this orange area on the map doesn't necessarily mean we're designating a zoning layer for it.
Right, we are in fact not yet
Very good.
doing.
The nuance that I think would be worth stating to what you said is that it's not the city of Eugene that makes that determination. At an urban growth boundary, it would be the county and the city. So it couldn't be unilaterally decided by the city. There's a host of factors, many of which are at play here, that are balanced to decide what's the proper use for land when it comes in to an urban growth boundary. And you look at the circumstances at the time, presumably if there's a big railroad facility there, or then it just wouldn't be appropriate, and the county could decide that.
Thank you, I appreciate that. You know, I remain skeptical that this is enough land for 27 years, which is why when it came to our board last time in 2020, I supported the motion that was on the table at that point, which was to, hey, when we start in on these urban reserves, we need within 10 years to start this process over. Because clearly you have taken a very long time, years in this process already, knowing that you're using population estimates for 2019 tells me you've been doing this for a very long time. And in order to go through this process again, which inevitably will need to happen, we supported a trigger. Like, how would that happen? What would start that process again? Knowing the skepticism that we had in the fact that we don't know what the population will be. We know there's high demand for housing, at least for residential at the moment that we all know of. Certainly that could be for commercial industrial too, although I don't know the specifics on that. Just because we thought this will need to come back and do it again, not because we want more work for you all, because I know that this is a lot of technical work and a lot of public engagement. And generally when you wrap these up, you turn around and start all over at some point, right? You just keep going over and over. So I just want to offer that background for our newer commissioners as well. Thank you, Chair.
And thank you, Commissioner Buck. That's a good history lesson, so to speak. And, you know, the trigger that Commissioner Buck is talking about, maybe that's something to do with the 4% vacancy rate. Maybe that's something to do with houses in Avalon Village selling for $500,000. Maybe it's something to do with the fact that we can't build it. Well, maybe that's not it. I don't know. Let's continue the discussion.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that back up. That's what I was going to ask you to do, to make sure I was linking it all, and I think I am now. Sorry. I didn't-
No, that's fine.
Thank you.
You are recognized.
Thank
I know
you.
exactly who you are.
And thank you also for the briefing last week. That was really helpful. I don't think I have any questions at this time, now that you brought this up, so I could remember that language as it relates to what Commissioner Buck was saying. So that's great. My only question is completely off topic, except that was an adorable puppy in the first slide, and I wanted to know. Thank you for putting that in there.
With a wonderful eye for puppies. You know, before we discuss any further, there's something that you said, Rebecca, Ms. Gershow. There is no good area for Eugene to grow into. And, you know, from anybody watching from a distance, it seems like snail's pace, glacial pace that we're moving, but you've turned over virtually every stone. You've sunk sinkholes in every pasture to see if they're where the appropriate places for Eugene. Who put a city here in the first place, you know? When you think about it, you got slope on one side, you got wetlands, you got farmland. You know, there are much better places for a city, but I'm glad there is one here. But in the meantime, I'm going to hang on that quote. There is no good area for Eugene to grow into. Further discussion.
We do have vertical space.
And we're using vertical space. Commissioner.
I just had a couple of questions, or basically one. In that map and on the orange, is that, like, where you choose to go out, are the type 1 and type 2 soils a big part of that? Or, you know, like I'm looking at some of that farmland towards Fern Ridge and stuff like that where it could have gone north, what kind of, I mean, what are the parameters for stopping when you have a big portion like that? I know it's easier to build when you're building big areas versus lots of little areas, just out of,
So the highest value soils of agricultural are, so the soils that we could analyze as part of urban reserves are from agricultural and forest designated lands. So of the ag and forest designated lands, the highest value soils, those class 1 and class 2 soils, were up here. So they're actually not any of the orange. That is to say, predominantly. You may have, because soils are not tax lot specific, right? So you may have some slivers of higher value soils, but any lots that had predominant class 1 and class 2 soils was this area right here that was considered as part of our 30-year urban reserve. And that was the big discussion a couple of years ago. Do we keep that in because it's next to the urban growth boundary and it's flat? But it is the highest value soils that was left in our study area. And so and there was also one teeny little piece over here. And so that was the direction that we received. There are a lot of ag lands out here where you were looking at that are generally lower value soils.
yeah, I think if I recall, there's a lot of clay and stuff in those soils, so they don't produce real well. That was kind of my question, is why doesn't it keep going north up there? It looks like maybe there was,
We
Room?
did study that. Yep. We studied all of these areas north of Beacon where the urban growth boundary currently is. There were different constraints on the land closer to the river. There was a lot of floodplain and there were a lot of wetlands. Spring Creek is up there, so there were constraints that way. And then on the other side of River Road, there was a lot of high-class soils.
what about between like Clear Lake and the orange by Fern Ridge there? That's kind of the area I was, yeah.
Over here?
Yeah,
Yes, so that is primarily Amazon Creek floodplain. And it's also directly south of the flight path and the airport. So it had two significant constraints. It had the airport, the issues with being directly south of the airport, and it is very largely covered in floodplain.
Which actually does flood,
Which does
unlike
flood.
some of our floodplain.
And just a little detail on that is that, we're looking at areas to direct potential urban levels of growth in the future. So even though we and the state and the county may allow some development on wetlands with certain permits, in floodplains with permits and with flood insurance, we're looking at those areas that really make the most sense to direct future urban levels of development. So even though we allow some of that now in terms of looking at the capacity where we want to put future homes and jobs, that was one of the early decisions we made with this project, is what are those land types that may not be appropriate in the future to put more city-level urbanization. So it goes, I believe I said there are no perfect places to grow into, but it goes back to that whole concept. There are trade-offs.
well, and
I think you
that's,
said suitable, actually, but
Okay.
very good. Is that full?
yeah, I was just gonna reiterate real quick. I mean, yeah, the floodplain, that's huge if you're talking affordable housing. Now it's a couple $100 a month at times. That's something to avoid.
And if you ask, why don't we just go up Highway 99? Well, we bump right into Junction City, about 3 inches past that line right there. So,
Yeah, that's right.
further questions? It's been easy so far. So the things that I thought I may have to say, I don't have to say really, because because you've really covered everything, and everybody, each one of us read every single page of all of these attachments. You realize that?
Twice.
And Emily, your book that is thicker than that, I'm pretty sure. It's thicker than the book you have in front of you.
Yeah, this is just your ordinance.
Yeah, yeah.
There are other materials that support the project.
And there is a lot that goes into this. Once again, people watching from a distance to see how long this takes, it's the more you dig into it, you realize how deeply you have to consider so many different things, overlapping and overlaying. And, you know, the back in probably 2009, when we were doing Envision Eugene, big groups that we sat in, I always talked about, you know, if we're not careful, Junction City is going to grow into Eugene, and Crestwell is going to grow up into Eugene. Well, Junction City did grow into Eugene in the meantime, but it's pretty much industrial land, and it's a narrow strip down the Highway 99 corridor. But even then, once you get out from there, there's really not much buildable land, because it all has constraints one way or another. So it's but I'll tell you, it's tough work, and we really appreciate the deep work that the planning commissions go to really work their way through this. So what else do you need from us today, then? You've made the presentation, just need the motion, and then we're all on our way, and time to go home. Not quite, but then I will ask for a motion. Vice Chair Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. I'll move to approve the first reading of ordinance number PA 1388 and to set the second reading and joint public hearing with the City of Eugene City Council for February 28, 2023 at 6 p.m.
Moved by Vice Chair Trieger and seconded by Commissioner Buck. A work session and first reading, approving the work session and first reading and setting the second reading and public hearing on ordinance PA 1388, etc. Discussion to the motion? I'm seeing none. Then I'll call for the vote. All those in, this is not quite the ordinance yet, so just a regular vote on this one. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Thank you.
Great, thank you. We will
Remarkably
see you on
short
the
for how much
28th.
time you put into this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think we should have videos of puppies at every board meeting.
It is Puppy Bowl Sunday coming.
Puppy bowl. All right, then, Ms. Mograski, as we clear the room, we'll look at item number 11A, which is Order 23020711, in the matter of establishing a payment plan implementation fee for the Lane County Justice Courts, effective March 1st, 2023. And today, you have, I'll call on you as I usually do to introduce your panel, although we all know Captain Kincaid.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. Jeff Kincaid, our management analyst in county administration, is here to present this item on behalf of the Justice Courts. The board, I think, knows we have an independently elected Justice of the Peace that serves in the Florence Justice Court, and so Jeff will explain more about why this issue is coming before you on behalf of the Justice.
Thank you, Steve. Good afternoon, Chair Farr, Commissioners. My name is Jeff Kincaid, and after listening to that last one, I realized I made a mistake. I didn't bring any presentation with pictures of dogs or anything. It's just me talking with a really, exciting script and everything. So I'll do my best. I'm a management analyst in county administration. One of my duties is to work with our staff at the Lane County Justice Court located in Florence. We have 2 FTE out there split over 3 folks. That includes our Justice of the Peace, as Steve mentioned, the elected Justice of the Peace that we have out there. The item that I'm bringing forward to you today to establish a payment plan implementation fee for the Lane County Justice Courts is brought at the request of that Justice Court's judge. The Justice Court handles traffic violations, animal service charges, dunes violations, fishing and boat violations, county parks violations, U.S. Forest Service violations, small claims and evictions. So lots of violation stuff. All around Lane County, they're cited into the Florence Justice Court, or they may be cited into the Florence Justice Court. The citing officer has discretion. If, for example, it's near Oak Ridge, they don't have to cite all the way to Florence. They can cite into the Eugene Lane County Circuit Court. The Justice Court is part of our general fund at Lane County and relies primarily on fines and fees as their source of revenue. Currently, we're averaging about 120 payment plans each year out of the about 1,100 dockets process. It's gone up steadily over the last 4 years. There currently isn't a fee for the service to set up a payment plan and to administer. The proposed fee of $25 is consistent with the amount other comparable courts, other municipal and justice courts charge for the service of establishing and administering payment plans. This fee aims to defray the cost of time and supplies such as ink, paper, envelopes, postage that are incurred with every payment plan that we provide. This fee was brought before Finance and Audit Committee at their January 19, 2023 meeting, where it was voted to support sending to the Board of County Commissioners for approval. This fee is also consistent with Lanco Chapter 4.005.010 B4, its revenue policies, but it just states that generally fees will be set to recover the cost of providing the service. And lastly, I would say that if approved, this action would authorize a payment plan implementation fee for the Justice Court, but it won't be automatically applied to every payment plan established after March 1st. The judge, like the board, can employ significant discretion in how he adjudicates items brought before him in court. This fee is going to be another tool in his toolbox, and he can apply it with that same leniency and flexibility as he does with the other tools at his disposal. So that is all I have for my presentation. I'll pass it back to you, Chair Farr, for discussion and questions. Thank you.
And thank you, Mr. Kincaid. As you mentioned, Commissioner Buck and I heard more of an extensive analysis of this at the Finance and Audit Committee meeting. So I'll open this for questions. And Finance and Audit Committee has recommended passage. Vice Chair Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Kincaid. You and I spoke, so you knew I was
Yes.
going to bring these concerns forward. And I know I asked you several questions and you weren't sure there would be time or you'd be able to reach the judge in time to answer them, but I did want to get the questions into the record, in part to show that I am committed to trying to find a solution to this problem, but that I'm not supportive of this as the necessary next step that we take before we try to find some other solutions. I have real concerns that what we're doing is asking people who have a hard time paying what might only be something like $150, $250 citation, that we're adding to that by asking them to pay another $25. That all payments, it costs money to process any and all payments. So I would, for example, like us to look at, is it possible to do a very small payment processing fee to all citations that would then offset the cost of multiple payments for people on a payment plan, as one example. I also think there may be opportunities to address this through our budget process, if this is general fund money, and the $3,000 is what our packet tells us they're expecting this to yield. I asked if we could find out what percentage of the total cost the $3,000 represents, whether that's going to cover all of it or a portion. I also was asking if you could to find out what types of payments are accepted, because not everyone is banked and able to make, for instance, payments online or what have you, and what the repercussions for non-payment might be. So I still have far too many questions about this, particularly because, again, we are asking our least resourced people who cannot afford to pay on their citation to pay extra money. It is a poverty tax, and I would be voting no, but I am, as I said, willing to work together to try to find other solutions for the court.
Thank you, Vice Chair Trieger. Mr. Kincaid, go ahead.
Chair Farr, Vice Chair Trieger. I was able to connect with him yesterday afternoon, so I have answers, and I tried to mark down some of the questions, so please, if I miss some in my response, please let me know. So repercussions for non-payment. The judge has a lot of flexibility on this. He can bring people back into court. He can waive fines. He can take no action. Typically what he does is if a payment comes in, no action. If a payment less than what they've agreed to in their payment plan comes in and they include a small note that says, hey, this is why I'm having trouble, there's no repercussions. If there's no payment made and they send him, he said a slightly longer explanation. I don't know exactly what that entails, but slightly longer, and they're making that effort, then he doesn't have any repercussions for those. So there's not, I've worked with Judge Brissenden for a while now, and he tends to lean towards leniency, and So I think that he would tend to do that with this proposed fee as well, but those are the repercussions. As far as average ticket costs, usually there's multiple violations that are coming in. The most common 3 were driving while suspended, driving without insurance, and then speeding. And driving while suspended is a Class A violation. It's a $440 ticket. No insurance is a Class B violation. It's $265. And then speeding depends. It can be all the way up to a Class A and all the way down to Class D, depending on, I don't want to say severity, depending on the violation. So you said typically they go, those first 2 are bundled, which is about $700 for fees or for the violation. The percentage of our costs on this is a little bit more difficult to calculate. Like I said, the judge has a lot of discretion. He tends to not do payments of less than $25 a month because administering those is a lot more onerous. And then at that point, the return on investment isn't as good, but he has, depending on the situation, he has a lot of flexibility to do that. So I can't really give the percentage of our cost because if you have a $440 ticket and you pay $100 a month, it'll be 5 months, and then the cost will be spread over 5 months. If you have a $700 ticket and you spread it $25 payments, that's 28 months, so almost 2.5 years. So it's hard to nail down that number. Types of payment accepted: cash, check, money order, debit card, credit card, and we can also do electronic payment. We have it's called Point and Pay. It's an online system. And then I think you had also said, do you have any data on who's asking for payment plans? Was that the last one? We don't, because the judge doesn't, unlike in Eugene Municipal Court, I think they have a whole section that, assesses folks' resources and ability to pay, and then assesses what they can pay based off of that, which is a lot of resource. Like I said, we have 2 FTE out there. So the judge is generous with the plans. If folks ask for a payment plans, then he approves it. You don't have to apply or meet any special qualifications. And to that end, it's hard to know exactly who's getting them because we're not making them, submit income information or, any banking information or anything like that. And I think, did I miss any, Vice Chair Trigger?
No, that's great. I very much appreciate that. It's all really helpful. But really, it doesn't ultimately change my position and my vote, which again, this is fundamentally a poverty tax. It is our need to cover an administrative cost that's incurred for all citations being paid. So I would rather we go back to the drawing board and see if we can't come up with another way that we can do that that's more equitable.
Well, Commissioner Trigger, Vice Chair, thanks for those questions. Those mirror the questions that happened in the Finance and Audit Committee. We talked about the fact that the people who are asking for payment plans are the people who need the most leniency or don't have the money to pay for it. And you answered our questions, but I think Vice Chair Trigger brings them up anew. Anything you'd like to add to that, Commissioner?
I don't know what other options there are. And this particular item doesn't necessarily have like a major urgency to it. If there's interest in pausing on this to see if there might be yet another option available, I'm fine with that. I completely understand where you're coming from. We didn't have, really much other options available, but if there's other ideas on the table, we can talk about them, and then come back and discuss this item again.
Thank you, Commissioner Buck. And, that's one of the reasons that we're here. We don't just rubber stamp the recommendations that you make. So if we have questions about it, it is okay to send it back and say, bring us more information. And we'll probably go back through the Finance and Audit Committee if we did put a stall on it right now and ask you to give us more options. So then, Commissioner Lovell.
If I may, thank you, Chair. Mr. Kincaid, you bring up a lot of good points about what's going on with the relationship with the judge and how it relates to each constituent that comes in before him. But I wanted to also, I disagree a little bit with Vice Chair, and the reason I do is because I think what we're swirling around here as a culture is we have the ability to pay shouldn't be weighed by the ability to break the law. As the judge has said, he has the right to adjust and work, but all need to be accountable to the law on an equitable basis, even if you can or can't pay. You'd mentioned that some of the fines we get are multiple fines that are speeding fines or things that have to do with operating the vehicle. They have rights and responsibilities attached to those, and when people break the law, we need to apply the law equally to people. Just the ones that have ability to pay shouldn't have the law applied to them differently than the ones that don't have a right to pay. Obviously, the judge has said he's willing to work things out, so I believe his intentions with people that couldn't pay would probably be worked out in an equitable fashion, just like someone who could pay. So from my constituents, I think at the baseline of a civil society is how people obey and apply the law evenly without bias. And so I want to put that into the record as well, because I don't believe this is a poverty tax. It's just being a responsible citizen, and that requires certain things that responsible citizens have to do. Thank you, Chair.
And thank you for that, opinion. Thank you. So where do we want to go from here? I'm inclined to not ask for a motion on this, to instruct Mr. Kincaid to come back with a couple of other options that may be more palatable. Palatable is not the right word, but maybe a little bit more amenable to the ability of people to actually comply. You know, the other option people have is to just skip out completely. And I think we have a certain percentage of that happens, that people just don't pay their fine, don't care about the fine. And the people who are setting up payment plans want to pay their fine. They want to take care of their obligation to the law, and they really want to do it in a fashion that doesn't adversely impact their ability to pay the mortgage or whatever it may be. So I think that's what we need to consider at this point in time. So if, without any objection, I think we'll take no action on this item today. And Ms. Mokrahajski, and ask that Mr. Kincaid or staff comes back with other options. There's no time urgency on this, I don't believe. Is that right, Mr. Kincaid?
Chair Farr, this is really part of, as I said, the Justice Courts is in the general fund. So as part of the budget process, we're looking at, we're not leaving any stone unturned. What are our options and what can we do? Okay. Saying that, I don't think that timing is as urgent, and that, of course, always willing I can always work with the judge and bring something back if that's the will of the board. Yeah. Very good.
And Vice Chair Trieger, you brought up the most significant questions, the most direct line of questions on this. So would it be okay if, Mr. Kincaid, if I ask Vice Chair Trieger to provide perhaps other input as you move forward with the determining what other courses of action may take place?
Sure, Farr, yeah.
That'd be okay.
I'd be happy to work with Vice Chair Trieger. Though I hadn't had an opportunity to look at. I know there's a lot of laws around the fees we can charge, so that will be a part of the discussion as well. If we can charge something similar to that, but I'd be happy, based on the discussion today, to work with the judge and work with Vice Chair Trieger to bring something forward.
With that object, Ms. Mokrahajski, go ahead.
I just, just as you're considering, I think, moving forward on this topic, what was brought forward to you was a rather small item, which is a small fee adjustment that my understanding is would address some administrative challenges that occur sometimes in those payment type plans, as well as generate some additional revenue. It's not a lot of revenue, right? I think we're talking about $3,000 annually. The bigger question really for the board for this service is we don't have to have, this is not a required court. We provide this service, this court exists as a service to one of our most outlying areas of the county, right? Because the folks, the tickets that are written are typically, they're written to this court. If they reside in an area that's close to the court, or they've received the ticket there. So if the court, so the discussion over the last several years really has been, as the cost for this court continues to increase and the revenue pays less and less of that cost, then the general fund starts to subsidize this operation. So the question ultimately for the board is like, is that a priority for the board and for the community to put general funds into that service versus another service? So that's appreciate the discussion here, which is a really good discussion about the impact on folks that are paying. The broader consideration, I think, is to what extent is this court existing a valuable service to the community, and therefore should county taxpayers as a whole subsidize the cost? Does that make sense? So just, keep that in the back of your minds as we consider revenue options, whether or not we should fund it through the general fund or increase fees to pay for it. As with everything within our budget, you squeeze one part, it's going to create an impact in another place.
And significantly, a few years ago, we increased the salary of the judge pretty significantly. I think it's, Ms. Margaret, was that 6 years ago that, I think, it's a pretty significant increase. So a part of the discussion, and Vice Chair Trigger has something to say also, maybe, is it time to weigh that option, or is it time for us to go ahead and pass forward, just to keep the court alive, so to speak, pass along the fee structure that you're recommending. Vice Chair Trigger?
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that. I just want to be really clear and send the message to the judge. It is my understanding, again, Mr. Kincaid spent a bit of time in my office with me last week going over these questions, and I do understand that he really is there to serve people and try to help them succeed. I just worry about us nickel and diming when I think about $3,000 as it relates to whatever percentage that is of our general fund relative to what it could do to somebody who needs to come up with $25 more to pay to do right. And fulfill their duty under the law that somebody else doesn't face, that's just too out of balance for me. And I haven't worked hard. I wasn't aware this was an issue, and so I haven't worked hard enough to see if we can come up with some other answers that don't land squarely on the back of someone who is already struggling to pay their fines.
Thank you, Vice Chair. So in the meantime, we're just asking that you take a little bit more time to give us a more broad analysis and bring it back. No time frame on that, just whatever works for staff and whatever discussion you may have between you and Vice Chair Krieger. Commissioner Seneca.
Real quick. So that's a court in Florence, right?
Yeah, Commissioner, or Chair Farr, Commissioner Seneca, yes, it is.
So it's a $25 fee if you have to drive over to go to court. Would that be the option?
That I know that there are lots of ways to respond to a ticket, and I think one of them is in writing, email. There's lots of different ways, so you don't necessarily need to appear in person.
That was my question. That $25 is going to go pretty quick in fuel at that point.
Yeah.
And there's plenty of discussions about Florence having to come over here for most services as it is. So it is valuable.
Chair Farr, Commissioner Seneca, if I made I think that was a lot of the discussion that happened in 2012 when we consolidated down from 3 justice courts down to 1. There was a lot of concern, that folks on the coast would have to drive all the way into, I think the Springfield, yeah. I think we called it Central Lane, was the one that was proposed to remain. But we kept the Florence one because of that concern that you brought up.
That's kind of it's $25, but then it's $3,000. So it's, if you're putting something on someone else's back, what are we really saving at the same time?
Well, we'll look forward to a deeper discussion, and thank you, Vice Chair Strieger, for bringing up the points that you brought up. Mr. Kincaid, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All righty, then we'll move down the agenda. By the way, I'll remind that we do have a need for executive session this afternoon. Item 11B, Mr. Markowski, any announcements?
I just wanted to note that Diana Jones did send to the board the request that we had, what is today now? Was it 2 weeks ago? No, just a week ago. Today's the 7th, right? So on January 31st, the board requested, Commissioner Lovell requested the list of capital projects over the past 3 years from 0 to $10 million, I think. So there were 27 projects listed there. And so we'll close that item and leave that where it is. I just want to make sure that you all were aware that that information was sent to you.
Thank you.
That's all I have.
That's all the announcements? Oh, my gosh, okay. You won't have another chance for 3 more weeks.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not baiting you.
I'm good.
Then we'll move on to item 12, announcements. Ms. Pettigrew.
Good afternoon, Chair Farr, Vice Chair Trieger, and Commissioners. My only announcement today is that I'm delighted that we have had a really robust pool of candidates for our 2 open Assistant County Council positions. And I am hopeful that when I see you again, I will have even more announcements and positive news in that regard. But we've had a great group of individuals come and interview with us. It's been a busy couple of days. Thanking my co-panelists for their time in taking out an entire Monday to interview such a fantastic slate of candidates. And we have individuals who've clerked with us in the past and a lot of returned interest and revived interest in the office. So thank you for your support of our office, and hopefully soon I'll come back with more good news.
Well, thank you, Ms. Pettigrew. I forgot to say any questions or comments from Mr. Mokrowski or Ms. Pettigrew at this point in time. Seeing none, we'll move down to a review of assignments. Excuse me, Commissioner's business. Any announcements from the board? Moving right along. Future board assignment requests.
Do have one.
Commissioner Seneca.
I would like to look into a comprehensive review of our housing barriers within the jurisdiction and control of Lane County. During my campaign for this office, I've mentioned multiple times, I've heard a variety of concerns from constituents all over Lane County, including a recent trip to Blue River with Commissioner Buck. These concerns regarding affordable housing, the lack of inventory, the difficulty, cost, and time it takes to obtain approvals and permits under Lane County jurisdiction. I believe that we should be doing everything legally possible to assist in an increase in the inventory of our rural affordable housing. And a good place to start is a review of our code and processes used to approve housing. How are we doing? What are we doing? And how can we do it better? I believe we should obtain an outside source evaluation. This would be far more than a performance audit. This code review will require expertise in Oregon land use law and zoning codes. I would like to get head nods from our county administrator or from our county commissioners for our county administrator to return to the board with the draft scope of services for an RFP to perform this review. Commissioner Buck, I was hoping that you would assist in going through the RFP before it comes back to the board, so it addresses some of our rural concerns and issues. That being said.
Okay. So if I may just restate that, you're asking for a review in order to come back with a suggestion for an RFP.
Yeah.
And that suggestion, Commissioner Buck would ask for a willingness to help analyze the review.
Yes, I heard lots of her concerns and how involved she's been up there in Blue River, and I think it would be a good team. We share a lot of the same concerns.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Buck, did you have your hand raised for a comment?
Sure, I just thought I'd respond because we had a discussion about this yesterday, and it kind of came down to if we were going to do a review basically of the land management division, what would the scope be, right? We don't have a performance auditor here with us, and we haven't for a while. And we know that there's concerns in the community. They're pretty significant. We also respect our staff there greatly. And so it's important that I think we would work together with staff to come up with an appropriate scope of work. And so we really need the time with staff, more than 15 minutes, of course, in order to work together and see what that scope of work would be, and then most likely bring that back to the board for approval of any kind of review by an outside consultant. But we need the time to work with staff on that.
I think I understand that. And Ms. Mokrajski, a part of your style of management, we've conducted performance reviews all along. Even when we had a performance auditor, you've been auditing the departments not independently, but through your office and your function, with some pretty good success. I mean, they've identified areas where we've streamlined and where we've made things more effective. So this may come right into that same type of a performance evaluation that you already have experience with. That it's not something that's brand new out of the air. So do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, thank you, Chair and Commissioners. We've done a number of performance reviews, organizational structure reviews. We're currently doing one in human resources, and the past several years we've done a review of our fleet services, our facilities, our technology services. I'm probably missing a couple of additional. So, I think it's a good practice and one of the benefits of doing an RFP and soliciting expertise in the market is that you can get really particular knowledge and expertise in that area that you're interested in. So I think this, I'll wait for your direction, but the assignment sounds pretty clear if their head nods.
Okay, very good. And I wanted everybody to understand that while we did choose 8 years ago to employ a commission-based performance auditor, you do it all along. I mean, it's probably more than other governments that I've been involved with. You continually are auditing and making certain that we are effectively using the limited resources that we have. So once again, it's not something that you've not done before. It's not something that's alien or out of your realm of capability. So with that, Commissioner Senegat, you heard that response from the administrator. Vice Chair Trieger.
Thank you. I just want to ask a clarifying question because I heard saying this would be different. If we did have a performance auditor in place, this is different. And I think from your comments, Administrator, it's helped me understand what the difference would be is there's more content expertise, and it's not just about the performance of our land management division per se, it's the entire landscape, pardon the pun, of what, like all the regulatory environment, statutory potential barriers, to use the word in the request, and so on. So it's not just about the function of county government and our performance. That is one element of what's being asked to look at, is to really understand the totality of what's happening that might be preventing us from increasing housing stock in Lane County jurisdiction. Is that right?
I think so. I mean, I think ultimately what
Right.
When Commissioner Seneca is making the request, so he can clarify certainly what his intent is. But I think in any cases that we've looked at reviews, that one thing I didn't say that I think was stated by Commissioner Seneca and Commissioner Buck is in all of the reviews that we've done previously for internal operations or for different services and operations that the county's responsible for, we engage the staff that are doing that work, right? That's a key part of any review is you can't have, the people doing the work separate from the actual review itself. You have to have the folks from the outside that are bringing in a different lens and maybe best practices in the industry where they're comparables, and then the staff that are here doing the work, working together to try to understand what do we control, what are the things that are within our control that we can change and improve. And certainly we know in land management, this is an area that there's a lot outside of our control, given the state regulatory framework around land use laws and building code requirements. There's a lot that we can't change. So the question really is, what are the things within our control that we can continue to improve upon? So I think that would be, from my perspective, an area that we would want to focus. But again, in partnership with the great team that we have in land management. Yeah.
Yeah, if I could just add, that was, I wrote it up and down about 3 or 4 times, and then after Friday with Commissioner Buck, I realized, how valuable would it be to have more input with the staff and just come at it that way, and it's not a performance audit, it's all encompassing.
And Mr. Mokrajski, you pointed out that subject matter experts would be employed. They're auditors who actually, this is the area of expertise that they have. So we can expect knowledge from the outside to combine with the knowledge that we have on the inside. Okay. Well, head nods on this. Yes, it looks like you have them. And Ms. Mokrowski, I'll be very interested to hear what you heard when, on the next item, which is a review of assignments.
Well, I will say that these two assignments are pretty clear, actually. The first one that I had was to evaluate alternative options to address justice court revenue challenges, something to that effect. So Mr. Kincaid, along with Commissioner Trieger, will work on alternative options and bring that back to the board. Second request was from Commissioner Senega to draft a scope of services for, to come back to the board for ultimately a comprehensive review of housing barriers in Lane County, including, well, this is where it gets a little, but affordable housing, affordable housing options, the time of permitting, review of code and processes, all encompassing related to particularly the things that could streamline our processes for building, permitting, and inspections and land use decisions.
Okay, with the ultimate goal of facilitating potentially less expensive housing. So, okay, does that cover your the assignment as you had intended it to be?
Absolutely.
Very good. Good job. I'm highly impressed.
I'm sure Ms. Jones will make sense of it. She always does.
She's listening. Very good. Then with the that's the completion of the review of assignments. Then we do have a need for executive session, and so with any further business before we go into executive session, we do reserve the right once again to come out from executive session. I read us in earlier, but we didn't have the executive, for those who may be watching, we didn't have the executive session following my reading us into executive session earlier, so I'll read us in again. And at the sound of my gavel, the Board of County Commissioners will be in recess, and we will reconvene in executive session in our own offices at, how about 5 minutes past the hour? That'll give us all a chance to regroup. Then the Board of County Commissioners will meet in executive session to conduct deliberations with persons designated by the governing body to carry on labor negotiations. This executive session is held pursuant to ORS 192.6602D, which allows the Board of Commissioners to meet in executive session for the purposes listed. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave the room. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decision may be made in executive session. We reserve the right to come back out into public session should the need arise. And before I strike my gavel, in case we don't come back, our next board meeting is actually on February 28th, I think, isn't it? 28th. So we'll be in, the board will have other business between now and February 28th. We are recessed.